Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second webinar in the series of the CARICHAM, that's the Caribbean Chambers of Commerce Regional Growth Series. Now, CARICHAM is a network of 21 countries, 21 national chambers of commerce in the Caribbean, to be exact. And the aim of CARICHAM is to advocate and create enhanced value for members of the respective chambers of commerce. We are truly delighted that you could join us today. And to our members of the Regional Network of Chambers of Commerce, to our business support organizations here in Barbados and across the region, to all private sector members, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am Misha Lobban Clarke, and I'm the Executive Director for the Barbados Chamber of Commerce. The BCCI is very pleased to facilitate today's session on behalf of CARICHAM, and I'll be moderating the webinar. Our webinar is entitled Remote Work, Maintaining a Competitive Edge for Businesses. And of course, the webinar will be exploring the topic of remote work and how businesses can maintain a competitive advantage. Now, remote work, while it is not a new concept, during the global COVID-19 pandemic, it became the new default for many businesses. They saw in an effort to reduce business disruption and of course to minimize the risk posed by the pandemic. The pandemic naturally forced many companies regionally and globally to move their businesses and customers online. It brought with it a surge of demand in the delivery of services, online tools, and a push for businesses to innovate rapidly in order to deliver critical and essential services during the pandemic. And as companies transition post-COVID, there is no doubt that new economic models, new modes of doing business, new ways of thinking about work has begun to emerge. In fact, according to a recent Forbes article entitled Remote Work, How to Succeed Over the Long Term, the survey stated that of 317 CFOs and finance leaders interviewed, they found that 75% of companies do plan to shift, or at least 5% of their businesses on-site workforce to permanently remote post-COVID. So our subject matter experts who will explore this topic of remote work and how businesses can maintain a competitive edge are Ms. Vanessa Phala. She's a senior specialist for employers' activities at the ILO, that's the International Labour Organization. Ms. Norma Shorey-Bryan, who is Director for Catalyst Consultants, and Mr. Mario Greene, and he is the Senior Manager for Transaction Advisory Services at Ernst & Young Barbados. Before I introduce our first presenter, I'd just like to let participants know that you're invited to post your questions and comments to the panelists via the Zoom chat that we have. And your mics are disabled, but we of course will allow questions after each presenter. So our first presenter, I'm very pleased to introduce Vanessa Phala. And Vanessa joined the ILO in April 2016 as the Senior Specialist for Employers Activity. And prior to joining the ILO, Ms. Phala, who is in fact a South African national, was the Executive Director at the Business Unity South Africa, and she holds a master's degree in International Relations from Wits University and an Executive MBA from Arthur Lockjack Global School of Business, the University of the West Indies. And in fact, she is currently pursuing a doctorate in business administrator. Welcome, Vanessa. And we give you the floor for your first presentation on the topic, remote work and implications for the workforce regionally and globally post-COVID.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much. I'm just going to remove my background screen. It's a little, okay. Thank you so much and good morning, everybody. I think, let me see if I can share my screen. Correct, I can. All right. Excellent. So let me take this opportunity to say good morning from a very rainy day in Trinidad. It's been raining for a couple of days now. And also take this opportunity to thank CARICHAM and Barbados Chamber of Commerce for inviting the International Labour Organization to this webinar. I also want to welcome and say good morning to my fellow speakers and participants that are joining us from across the region. This is also an opportunity, I think, for the ILO to also share some of the work that we do. Our office based in Trinidad and Tobago, we work with constituencies in the Dutch and the English-speaking Caribbean. In Barbados, we work very closely with the Barbados Employers Confederation. I'm sure many of you are aware of the BEC. Also, let me welcome and say good morning to all our participants. Just quickly, I want to share with you that a few years ago, the ILO turned 100 years last year, 2019. And leading up to our centenary celebration, we conducted some conversations around the globe on what the future of work is going to look like, or what the future of work looks like. And there was a global commission that was appointed, led by my president of the Republic of South Africa and the Swedish president, and also made up of experts from universities, from the business sector, and so forth. And they led the development of what we call the Future of Work report at the ILO. But part of the conversation, which we also had in the Caribbean, because we wanted to make sure that the global discussions also, considers the voices of the different regions. And we wanted to make sure that the issues that are pertinent to the Caribbean region are also included in those global discussions. As part of those dialogue, we identified a number of drivers of change for the future of work. And this included technological innovation, demographic shifts, climate change, and globalization. And I think you will agree with me that this indeed continues to shape the way the future of work is looking like. And we're seeing with technological advancement and the fact that we are still able to connect and be able to do work even though we are not located in our physical spaces. So what happened then is that last year, January, as we celebrated our centenary, we also launched the Future of Work report that also led into the ILO Centenary Declaration for the Future of Work. And what this actually says is that, as the report says, we need to adopt a human-centered approach as an agenda for the future of work. And that approach should actually be placed in the center of any social and economic development in any country. And we are seeing also how the pandemic is also reminding us that the people and the work that they do is very important. So let me share with you also that as the ILO, of course, our plans for what we had for the biennium, we had to readjust in order to respond to COVID-19, but also to provide our constituencies, our government constituencies, our employers' constituencies, and the trade unions in order to help them to navigate and plan their activities as we are battling this deadly disease. So what we have done as the ILO, beginning of March this year, there's been quite a number of tools that we have produced, that we have provided to our constituencies to help them with this particular pandemic. We had an employer's guide on how employers' organizations can manage COVID-19. We also developed a business needs survey, which was very important because it allowed enterprises to collect data about the actual impact of COVID-19 on their businesses. Of course, the idea is to make sure that once we have data, we have evidence from the ground, we are able to make better and informed recommendations in terms of the kind of support that enterprises require to deal with COVID-19. And Barbados, through the BCCI, led the administration of this particular survey. We also had a tool that specifically speaks to business continuity planning for COVID-19, and we had a number of sessions in the region where we discussed and engaged on these tools. As we know, in the Caribbean, we are now, in addition to dealing with COVID-19, we are now in the hurricane season. So issues around business continuity planning becomes very, very critical. We also have or produce safe return to work guidelines and guidelines on working from home or remote work, which I will touch on specifically in my presentation. We recently also produced a COVID and mining prevention and control checklist and a 10-step tool for safe and healthy return to work in times of COVID. Of course, different businesses within the region are beginning to open up as the governments are easing the lockdown measures. So as much as we're also discussing remote work, but also we are mindful that businesses are opening up and workers and employers will be going back to their offices, and therefore the need to ensure that the workplaces are safe environments, and there are specific interventions that have been put in place or should be put in place to manage the spread of the disease in the workplace. So when you look at the health and safety requirements and provisions of tools for effective remote work, of course, not every country has a clear legislation in terms of how to manage and how to deal with remote work. There are some few countries that do have legislations that speaks directly to remote work, such as the Netherlands. In the working condition decree, there are elements that speaks to teleworking. Also Poland, in their labor code, it addresses teleworking. Australia as well, and China and Chile in March 2020 also enacted a law regulating teleworking. And of course, this becomes important because it creates clarity in terms of certainty of the legal requirements in order to deal with remote work. But of course, like I said, COVID-19 happened so drastically that not many countries were really prepared, and we've seen different countries in the region also amending certain legislation to make sure that they respond to COVID-19, and they also, we've seen different stimulus packages being implemented by the various governments to support workers and employers. But of course, where there are no specific guidelines regarding remote work or working from home, employers are advised to consult provisions in existing national legislation and regulations, if not also looking at what are the requirements as far as occupational safety and health, and also other relevant directives and guidelines by your national legislatures and local authorities. Now, even though it may be and it is difficult, and we've seen how difficult it is for employers to carry out, the traditional health and safety risk assessments that will actually be done ordinarily in a workplace, but now in a home environment or a remote environment, it becomes very difficult to do that. But nonetheless, it also remains the employer's responsibility to check that the work that is assigned to be, or that is asked to be performed, is one that can be safely performed from home or from a remote area. And adjustments needs to be made to the tasks if needed to ensure that they are safely doable when working from home or from a remote area. And workers also have the right to the right equipment and the tools to use as they are working from remote areas. And also that arrangements are made to ensure the company's equipment is if taken home to facilitate working from home, is accounted for and returned in conditions that it was provided. And that workers have the relevant information, instruction, supervision, and training, including measures to deal with some emergencies. And that there has to be reasonable accommodations to make sure that workers with disabilities in relation to work that they are required to perform from home. So these are some of the guidelines in terms of how do you manage remote work or employees who are working from home. And I must also indicate that the guidelines that we have been producing as the ILO are also informed from the data that we are gathering from the ground. So a lot of employers would have also contributed in terms of the challenges that they are experiencing and how they are dealing with those challenges. Just a little example that I found from Spain, which I think it's useful. In order to facilitate working from home during COVID-19, Spain established an exceptional temporary legal measure allowing working from home risk assessments to be carried out by the worker based on a provided checklist. So the employers would develop a standard checklist and make sure that each worker or each employee, as they are working from a remote area from home, they are able to go through the checklist to make sure, as part of risk assessment, to identify if there are any specific things that could be challenging and impeding them in doing their work, but most importantly, things that could pose a health and a safety risk as they do their work. Now, what are the employer's responsibilities and liabilities in terms of remote work as a result of COVID? Like I said, as the ILO, we've been having a lot of webinars around the region on COVID-19 related topics. And we see a lot of questions and a lot of comments, particularly around employers' responsibilities, but also, in the absence of clear legal requirement or legislation, how does one deal with certain issues? The ILO, we have the Convention 155. This is a convention that speaks directly to occupational safety and health. And I must say that the ILO conventions are ratified by member states of the ILO, and they become legal requirements. And a lot of countries or member states that ratify ILO conventions are therefore expected to put measures in their national legislation to make sure that they do what the convention requires. The convention provides minimum standards, and countries in the national legislation can go above those requirements. In terms of the convention, the term health in relation to work, it indicates not merely the absence of disease or infirmity, it also includes the physical and mental elements affecting health, which are directly related to safety and hygiene at work. And employers have the overall responsibility of ensuring that all practicable preventative and protective measures are taken to minimize occupational risks. And also, like I said before, ensure that workers are adequately informed and appropriately trained on occupational safety and health issues. Of course, employers have a duty of care for all of their workers and provide working environment that is safe and without any risks. So what we did also a few years ago as the ILO, we worked on a CARICHAM model law on occupational safety and health and the working environment. And that model law has been used also by some countries like Bahamas, Guyana, Suriname, in terms of developing their own OSH legislation. And in terms of even for any country with an OSH legislation, they clearly stipulate what are the roles and responsibilities of the employer and that of the worker. And at the crux of it is to create a safe, sound, healthy, and secure working environment for the employers. And like I said, by extension, to places or a remote place of employment. Employers should also establish a system of reporting and investigating injuries, illnesses, and other accidents that occur because of work activities. Employers should also be aware of any increased health and safety risk that may arise from working remotely during the pandemic and COVID-19 pandemic. And that's why I said the Spanish example and the checklist that they have developed, it actually provides that information identifying the potential risks that needs to be addressed. Also, employers should keep in regular contact with the workers and keep them appraised of any resources that they have. In terms of the responsibilities of the employer to facilitate a safe and healthy remote work as a result of COVID, there are specific requirements such as providing the tools and the equipments that are required for employees to be able to do their work, providing warm working setup. And this is something also that is new. And I've seen in the data that we have, while in some countries they are moving step ahead, but other countries are beginning to identify what could be the company policy on some of the expenses that the employee would incur from working from home. And those are the things that employers need to also take into consideration. Compensation, workers' compensation. Of course, in some countries, when working from home is implemented, any injury incurred during work hours and arising from or while performing work function in the designated area of the house may be covered by workers' compensation. Insurance, as just like also issues around liability. And this also means that as employers, if legislation because of COVID-19 might not be so clear, I think it's also an opportunity to make sure that you look at your own company policies and guidelines and make sure that some of these things are taken care of. But the best thing that the employer can do is to just make sure that you are doing what is reasonably possible to provide as much safety and health as it relates to doing work remotely. Now, what are the implications for managers of human resources and labor law? Of course, there are multiple benefits of remote work. And I think as my colleague said in the beginning, it's not a new thing. I mean, we have been doing it before, but of course the extent because of COVID has been so massive. But also there are a number of benefits that comes with remote work, but also because of the agency or the agent nature of this kind of work that came, out of the blue. Both workers and workers may not have been prepared physically, mentally, or even infrastructure-wise to meet all the challenges that are posed by remote work. The Society for Human Resource Management had an interesting presentation as part of the International Organization of Employers, where they did some research, some survey to understand some of the challenges that the employers were facing because of COVID-19. And some of the findings indicate that 71% of employers are struggling to adjust to remote work. And 65% of employers say maintaining employee morale has been a challenge. Of course, with the pandemic and other things, compounded in the home and the pressures, if you have your loved one or family member who is ill or a friend who is ill, all of that has, they pose a challenge to one's mental well-being. Again, more than 1/3 of employers are facing difficulties, particularly with the company culture employee productivity and the regulation of leave. I recall when the pandemic was gaining momentum in the region, in Trinidad and Tobago, the Minister of Labor was also, toying around the issue of what she termed a pandemic leave, to ensure that there's clarity in terms of how employers are going to deal with issues of leave during this pandemic. Now, in terms of ways that coronavirus will change the world, again, there are several ways that this is going to shape and deal with how workers respond. The Society for Human Resource Management also identified some few ways of how COVID-19 is going to change the world of work. Remote work will become a widely accepted alternative. I think many of us are seeing how possible it is to work remotely. I know that in the beginning it was not easy for including myself. I found it very difficult to work remotely, but now that we are preparing to go back to office, I find myself now having to readjust again to going back to the office. Finding talent will become easier as new hires are available globally via remote work. Virtual learning is another thing also that will expand dramatically, so employees can develop their skills in less time. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to participate in some of the free sessions or lessons that have been offered by various organizations. I had registered for one offered by IMF on macroeconomics, and it's been quite an interesting course. And so there are a lot of those, and I think going forward, we're going to see more and more of virtual learning. Again, virtual reality will advance so employees can work more collaboratively through common viewing. Telemedicine usage will also spread as companies and employees recognize the value of distance care. And lastly, employers will become more fiscally conservative than in the 2010. We also working with employers organizations, like I said, in the region, to also understand from their perspective as employers organization, as the voice of employers, as employers networks, what has been the impact of COVID-19 for them and how it has impacted on their operations. And that data collection is underway. So in my conclusion, I want to say employers need to develop workplace policies to provide clear guidelines and address any challenges that may arise as a result of working from home or remote work, and that employers should regularly assess the effectiveness of such policies and guidelines, and most importantly, communicate regularly with workers on any challenges that they may be experiencing in implementing some of the policies and the guidelines from the company. And most importantly, and we've seen this as well, it's important to keep up with the government policies and directives, because as the shape and as we beginning to flatten the curve, there are different directives that are coming from our ministries in terms of opening up, in terms of going back to work. And as an employer, it's important that you keep abreast of those directives, because then they will inform how you do your work in your businesses. So that will be it. I hope I didn't take a lot of time. I will stop sharing. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for just laying the foundation for us, looking at the implications, of course, for labor, what in fact are employers' responsibilities and liabilities, and the implications, no doubt, for the management of resources. One of the key points you made, which is a reality, is that the COVID-19 pandemic, it kind of forced an even more rapid change within the context of the world of work. And you have said it, that it has in fact dramatically changed the world of work and redefined our own concept of work. And we do know that, of course, remote work is nothing new, and it may not apply across the board. We're not saying that it is, but it actually has become a topic that requires us to continue to engage on it, because it does have implications for not just labor. It has implications for the whole definition of work and how work is carried out. And so as we continue that conversation on the whole future of work and the implications of this new paradigm of work, it really is my pleasure to introduce our second presenter. I don't think we have any questions at this time. So Norma, I'll just move right on over to you, but please allow me to introduce you. Norma Shorey-Bryan is the Director of Catalyst Consultants, and she'll be speaking to us on, within this new paradigm of work, how do we maximize the talent and human resource potential if businesses are in fact going to be able to maintain that competitive edge. Norma is the founder and director of Catalyst Consultants, and she's a specialist in change management and organizational development, and she is a certified management consultant. She has worked with the private and public sector agencies and enhancing leadership capacity and teamwork, not only in Barbados, but across the Caribbean and internationally. And she currently serves on the board of the Barbados chapter of the Caribbean Institute of Management Consultants at CIMC. And she's a member of the Human Resource Management Association of Barbados, and also a member of the Small Business Association and the Caribbean Facilitators Network. Norma, it really is indeed a pleasure to have you as one of our panelists, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Misha. Is everyone seeing my screen? Okay, so I am really pleased to be here to share with you some of the areas that are part of my passion. How do we maximize our capacities and our human resource potential in our organizations? And thank you very much, Vanessa, for putting into context, a broader context of what the ILO is doing and what is happening internationally in terms of the many guidelines and opportunities that are emerging. COVID-19 has come in. It has disrupted our world, but it has not destroyed our world. Now, many of you are in a variety of businesses. Some of you are in businesses that have been using remote work for a long time, in the legal, the financial, the international business sector. Many of you are accustomed to doing that. Many of us consultants have been doing remote work for many years, and for many, many years. It's not a new concept for the Caribbean. But what COVID-19 has done is it has catapulted businesses and organizations to say, what is it that we need to do? Because work is not going to go back to an old normal, an old way of doing things. There is definitely and definitively a new normal. And I should say that in this space, leadership is key. You can manage performance, you cannot manage people. But we can lead people. So my focus today is looking at ways in which we as leaders and as business owners, our leaders at many different levels, can maximize the availability of our talent in doing remote work, but using our talent more effectively at all aspects of our organizations. And I want to focus on two elements. One is, how do we operate in a digital world? Well, Vanessa has already explained a whole number of tools that the ILO has available to be able to do that. And one of the things that as we are looking and working more effectively with our people, our businesses have to identify how we can use talent management metrics more effectively. There are many of them on the market. The one that I use has one of the highest levels of validity and reliability, and that is the Saville assessment. And it is used at all sections of the of the work cycle. In recruitment, because of course we are no longer just recruiting from our immediate space, we have the capacity, if we're getting remote work, to utilize talent from around the world. But how do we assess it in terms of what our businesses absolutely need? How do we develop people in a remote way? And that means that we have to have some metrics in terms of looking at where the strengths, where are the areas for improvement, and how do we develop the coaching and the team building and the capacity building to enable us to maximize the use of our talent. Of course, we need to focus on OKRs, because we cannot lead people and manage performance unless we are clear on what it is they are supposed to deliver. What are the deliverables? So the OKRs are being clear on the objectives, and then being able to think through what are the key results that you're looking for. And this is particularly important in a remote work setting, because if not, how are you able to maximize the productivity of your people? And there's so many OKR and capacity building tools that can be explored. And our businesses in the Caribbean have not been sufficiently using the ones that are digital. As I prepared for this, I spoke with a whole number of leaders and trying to get some greater clarity on what they are doing. And one of the things that one leader said is that I need to be very clear on the protocols, on the processes, so that we don't overlap, so that we are clear on something that has to be approved. What are the processes we need to go through? I don't need to say anything about productive meetings because we have too many of them, both face-to-face and virtual. But one leader also said that because people are preparing more carefully for meetings, sometimes, very often, the meetings have been more productive. Flexi time is something that our leaders in the Caribbean need to deal with much more effectively. And I think that COVID has catapulted them to recognize that we can have our workers on flexi time in a different way and using remote collaboration tools. But agile leadership, I think, is fundamental in terms of how we utilize our talent and our human resources. And in that regard, I would like to introduce a model of change and transition, which is something that I use in my change management work, because I'm passionate about helping people to change. Is that on the left-hand side, you will see that in COVID-19, the level of negativity that there was, the denial, the panic, the dread, the fear, the resistance, and we are moving people, as we are coming back to work and as people accepted it, they were beginning to feel more comfortable in doing the remote work, more comfortable in some of the new the new protocols that are in place in the public space as well as in our private spaces. And so we are beginning to see some shifts for people, but leadership is key in helping people to feel more comfortable, to be able to develop some greater optimism, to develop a greater level of acceptance of new ways of doing things. But that requires leaders also to make that shift. And that is also another area of my passion, because too many of our leaders are stuck in the command and control approach and mentality, which is a very unfortunate part of our cultural heritage. But they do not know sufficiently. They have not developed the tools and approaches to help people to be more productive and enable people's development in a very positive way. And leaders need to undertake that shift themselves to be more agile in their own styles of leadership if we are going to, if you're going to manage a remote workforce. a workforce that is operating more and more remotely. So in that regard, I would like to suggest that there are a number of things that we need to do in terms of working with our remote teams. First of all, we need to practice more CFR. Now, a lot of our teams really could do with a little of CPR to energize them and get them back on track. But CFR is one of the key elements for leaders to use, having greater conversations, providing more effective feedback in positive, constructive ways. I did a workshop with one of my client groups yesterday, and we were practicing the whole art of constructive feedback. And of course, recognition, valuing our virtual teams, saying to somebody, yes, you haven't got it perfectly, but this is where you did well. This is what you achieved. I'm very pleased about this. And how do we move forward into the other? But in that CFR, communicate, and I could go on and on. Because the issue about effective teamwork, about maximizing your human potential, whether you are in a co-located team or you are in a remote team, is around communication. Because a lot of the co-located teams, the biggest problem that they're faced in organization is poor communication. But communication is not giving out. And if you notice, I use one of my favorite steps there. Listen and silent are made up of exactly the same letters, but put together differently. You cannot listen unless you are silent and allowing the other person to share ideas. And being silent is not being absent. It is allowing the other person to supporting the other person in expressing themselves in positive ways. And part of that, and one of the things that I spoke with as I discussed with the leaders, is making sure that we clarify people's roles and expectations of what we need, of what is expected of them. And then that goes back to the OPRs. And that is one of the big issues that a lot of team members felt was not done properly when they were working in remote teams. I have put at the bottom, building trust. And in fact, that was one of the questions. How do you maintain trust in remote organizations? Well, some of these issues, practicing your CFR, communicating and listening are some of the ways that, and modeling behaviors are some of the ways that are going to create the trust, which is so fundamental in remote work. And I would like to indicate as leaders that we also need to be supporting our virtual teams in positive ways, providing that human touch. In fact, somebody said that what people are craving most is they are touch hungry. And whether they are in co-located teams or in virtual teams, people are touch hungry. They want people to check in, but I would like to make a difference between checking up and checking in. When you're checking up, there's a lack of trust. When you're checking in, you're saying to the person, I'm following up. I want to see how you're doing. Not just, may I say, in terms of achieving the objectives, but also in terms of what is happening in your life. I think that COVID has made us more aware of the challenges that people are facing in their lives as they are undertaking homeschooling, balancing many different roles, doing many different things in their space. And the leader that can recognize this, that accepts this, it makes a tremendous difference in building that trust and helping people to come back into the workspace. encouraging non-work interactions. And I put there on the left-hand side, the coffee break, some of the tips that we have done in terms of managing remote teams is having virtual coffee breaks. The same way in our family, when we have celebrated birthdays, everybody brings their wine glass to give a toast. Why not have virtual coffee breaks? Have ways in which people can support, can interact in around non-work issues, around personal issues. And then I have spicing up the workspace. And that's one of the things, having a little competition. Who has the most interesting background in their workspace? Putting up funny things in the workspace, which give people a smile. All of that is part of encouraging the work-life balance. And I cannot stress that enough. And when Norma points one finger to someone, 3 fingers point back to me, because all of us need to take the time to care for ourselves, both in terms of physically. And let me just make one point. Vanessa talked about a lot of the things related to health in the workspace, and we're very full aware of a lot of the sanitization protocols that are going to be in place. But what about the protocols in terms of us utilizing too much the screen and being too much on the computer? And one very little tip, the 20-20-20. 20 minutes, after 20 minutes on the computer, take 20 seconds to look at something 20 feet in the distance. Helping people to recognize that they need to look after themselves. And let me just say, many of us are on a treadmill. Our mind is full, and we need to be mindful. Take the time to breathe, to relax, to just calm ourselves so that we can appreciate the world that we live in. And I end this by saying that we need to live in gratitude. We have so much to be grateful for in this Caribbean of ours. We can reach out to the world. We have a lot to teach the world. One of the things that I appreciated about our Barbados Prime Minister, when asked on an interview with on CNN, she said, what makes the difference is about the female prime ministers around the world. We care. Now, caring is not gender specific. But let me just say that some of those caring approaches or supervisory approaches, starting meetings with a check-in, how are you doing? That was a tip from one of the leaders that I spoke with. Makes such a tremendous difference with people. And so on that note, I would like to say thank you for listening in, as we are looking at different ways in which we can maximize our talent or human resource potential, because without our people clued in, our businesses will not be able to be competitive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Norma. I think you have kind of you're moving the conversation along most definitely, because you're reminding us that among the realities that COVID-19 has posed for many businesses is to recognize that, one, we're operating in a digital space. It's not new, but I think it has brought to the fore, in fact, that we're indeed operating in a digital space. And I thank you for kind of honing your presentation to look at what are some of the critical tools to supporting our teams working within this digital space, the virtual environment. I think one of the keys to your presentation that you have highlighted is the need for agile leadership. It's very key. How, as leaders in the post-COVID era, we are now looking at transitioning companies and businesses, but we're not just looking at the new economic models. We have to drill down to a new mode of business, but we now have to drill down to how do we function in terms of our resources, how we're utilizing them effectively. And I kind of like your CPR versus CFR. and the importance of in companies in trying to focus on their objectives and the key results, not to forget the importance of the CFRs, which is conversation, feedback, and the recognition of value in the team. Norm, we have one question, and I'm going to ask my team member. It's been posed to you, Norma. Akila, what's the question?
Hi, good morning. The participant would like to know if Norma can please explain the difference between OKRs and KPIs.
Very good question. Norma, you're muted.
We have grown up, many of our business, in terms of key performance indicators, which are good. There's no, they are good. But sometimes those key performance indicators are done more on an annual basis. What they are saying in terms of agile and competitive teams is that we need to focus more on things that are done at shorter time frames, which could be monthly, quarterly maybe. And basically, you're helping that person in collaboration with their leader supervisor to think of what are the objectives that I have, and what are the results, not just the objectives, but how will I know when I have reached these on a short-term basis. So yes, they are quite similar to KPIs, but let me just say, I think in our more digital world, in our world where we are dealing with people that are in a distance, that the OPRs is another way with a nuance of helping us to manage and track performance. And let me also say in that one of the things that one of the leaders that I spoke with felt is that many of the teams are actually, some of the team members are actually working harder and anxious to make sure that they achieve the objectives that have been set that are linked to the wider company objectives. And that is very positive. And I think that agile and supportive leadership will bring more of that out in our people.
Thank you very much, Norma. Thank you. So we continue the conversation, and at this time, it is really my pleasure to introduce Mario Greene. He's the Senior Manager for Transaction Advisory Services at Ernst & Young, Barbados. And Mario will be speaking to us, presenting a case study from the business perspective in terms of how they dealt with the remote work arrangements during the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course, transitioning to maintain its competitive edge. Mario is in fact well placed to speak on this topic because he was the team leader for EY in the transitioning and leading the team to a remote work environment. He has 8 years experience in financial and transaction advisory services. He has had 5 years working at the Big Four financial advisory practice and another 3 years working as the business development manager at the Caribbean region's largest independent fuel supplier. Mario also spent 2 years as marketing manager for the largest independent fuel supplier in the Caribbean region before joining Ernst & Young Transaction Advisory Services in 2020. Mario, it is a pleasure to have you join us, and over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, fellow panelists. Thank you, participants. It is a pleasure to present to you today. It was very, very heartening to listen to Norma's presentation, and I hope that EY as a company would have touched on many of the things that she so succinctly pointed out as good indicators for how well your company performed in their work from home environment. As we walk through our case study today, we will be looking at the EY experience, but also expanding in terms of what did the pandemic mean in terms of looking at your business critically and identifying new ways and better ways to do business to make sure that you can reshape your business today to reinvent your business for tomorrow. Right. as business leaders, as we went into the uncertainty that was driven by the shutdowns that accompanied the COVID pandemic, there are many concerns that I believe as a business community we would have shared. And EY, while being quite advanced in terms of technology from before, we still had our concerns as we went into this new paradigm. Top of the list, of course, was potential loss of productivity. And we believe this is something that was probably shared across the board. And one example of this would be, for example, where you have employees who may have had desktops and not laptops, and they were now put into a work from home environment. How then do you maintain the levels of productivity that you would have had pre-COVID and ensure that your business can continue to deliver to your clients' needs? Which leads into the revenue routes to markets and clients. How would that be affected? Lack of or untested technological infrastructure and access. While we had the technological infrastructure largely in place, in many ways it was still untested. And as we go through the presentation, we'll touch on this a bit more. Data security and risks. EY, we're a service-driven firm. We also do audits, and data security is a key component of what we do, and we wanted to make sure we can maintain the integrity of this. The lack of coaching and collaboration in terms of that missing element in terms of the physical interface and interaction, and the barriers to making remote work a challenge. And again, this is a real challenge, as many individuals have different circumstances. So, for example, the caretaker who had to take care of their family with daycare and schools being closed, how would they find the right balance to maintain taking care of their home along with meeting their productive outputs? And at this point, I would like to say, EY as a company, our view was the health and safety of our teams came first, and then we kind of worked around with some measure of flexibility as to how we would be able to enable and help the remote work to work well. So as we moved through the process, we adopted 4 guiding principles that we thought were effective in terms of remote working. The ability to communicate often, and this had to be balanced, where as Norma pointed out too, you didn't want meeting burnouts, but you needed to communicate often enough that teams were comfortable. And again, there was an element of human interface and interaction where every meeting we had just started out with a check-in to see how our team members were doing. And that led into us fostering stronger team relationships, where that personal touch and empathetic leadership allowed us to connect as teams. And really, I think that went a long way in terms of making sure employees' welfare and mental well-being was also being looked after during this time period. As you were no longer sitting in the same office, there was that need to optimize calendars. So in many instances, the whole team had open calendars, and we had a point person who then was responsible for making sure calendars were well synced up, team meetings were set up at the appropriate times, and generally making sure that there was a continuous flow of information between teams, and meetings were held in a seamless manner. And like everything else, this was an iterative feedback loop. So where we were when we started the work from home protocol as a result of the pandemic was quite different from where we are right now as we move to go back into work. One of the things that we can point to here is when we first started, most of our meetings were actually on Skype, but then we found the Microsoft Teams suite actually worked better for us, and we quickly transitioned to that platform, which allowed us to engage and interact in a more seamless manner, and it just had more capabilities in terms of functionality. What are some of the key learnings that we took out of this as a company? And again, I think it's key to understand that across sectors, across industries, across businesses, every person's experience is going to be different with this remote working environment. But some of the things that we found were very useful to keeping productive was that finding the right balance of management check-in. And to Norma's point, I think what was key was the ability to check in and not check out. So starting off that conversation and really personalizing it and bringing it to your staff in that manner we found went a long way in terms of making sure employees remain motivated and really were streamlined in terms of getting their information and deliverables in a timely manner. Like Norma's referred to as well, strong leadership and role modeling was key. If you are going through a process of change, that leadership needs to be a top-down method, and leaders needed to embrace the role of technology and different examples that we needed to set to make sure that our workers were comfortable and we were able to maintain the same level of service that our clients were accustomed to during this lockdown period. Again, speaking to the ability to address wider concerns. So while we understand that we are a services firm and we need to manage our clients' expectations, we also needed to manage our internal clients' expectations, which is our team. So we were very open to allowing staff to address any concerns they may have had and trying to get them to move away from justifying remote presentations. So we were more focused on the outputs and what were the deliverables than necessarily on your screen time, because the type of firm we are, we do work on chargeable hours, and those chargeable hours translate into outputs in terms of client deliverables. And we knew once we kept the output in mind, we would always be in a position to deliver to our clients. And then finally, we were able to celebrate people who were innovative and trying things differently, and also the practice of teamings, where it was more than just getting the job done, it was also kind of being your brother's keeper and making sure that employees were comfortable during what was a trying time. So to Norma's point, is this a new normal, or has normal changed? And I think, again, this is not a one case fits all. This is another scenario where there needs to be some flexibility built in, and depending on the company and the sector in which you operate, your paradigm shift will be different. But one of the key things that we found was the ability to have strong leadership. In most of our notes that came out from leadership, it was always that ability to lead with empathy and also direction. So our emails to our staff, when they went out, generally open with a line, basically engaging staff, trying to figure out how they were coping with the pandemic, and also giving them direction in terms of where we were going as a firm. As many employees were looking for cues from their leaders in terms of one, how the firm was actually performing, how were we going to implement the necessary protocols in which to keep employees safe. And generally, in conditions of uncertainty, you need to have firm leadership and very much firm direction in terms of keeping your employees on board with you. And that fed right into that developing of the continuous two-way communication protocol, where we basically had open lanes as leaders to allow employees to engage and interact with us as much as humanly possible. And I guess this is also finding the right balance in terms of what is over communication versus the appropriate amount of communication to keep your staff on board. Then we transition into smart work, which is considering new approaches that balance remote and on-site working. It was interesting to hear in your opening remarks, Misha, your comments around CFOs, where there is a view that, has remote working worked so well that you can reduce your real estate footprint and save costs. But we think that needs to be carefully evaluated and monitored. And there needs to be clear metrics in terms of what you define as, productive output and how that truly measured up in the remote working environment. Then one thing that we also found was very key was the concept of the flexible workforce. We had moved to a flexible workforce in some measure before. So this was just a case of accelerating that. When you had caretakers in your homes who had to take care of home just before coming into their work offices or wherever they're set up in the home, you needed to build in a level of flexibility. And that flexibility works well when you have clearly defined outputs and goals for your workers so that they can be able to pace themselves to meet their deliverables. Following on from that was the ability to look at what is the new performance and reward and compensation system. In many instances, as businesses' revenues decline as a result of the very strict lockdown protocols that were put in place to counteract the pandemic, their monetary space will be limited in terms of their ability to offer monetary rewards to employees. And at this point is where you really need to look at what are the intangible and intrinsic nuggets that you can offer your employees to keep them motivated and loyal to you as a company. And then that new paradigm of skills, again, as we looked internally as a company, it required us to retool and reskill, embrace technology, and build out some of the technology that we had as latent capacity. Now we had to roll that out at scale just to preserve business continuity. And again, there are benefits to that because then you can harness data and digital platforms so you're more in tune with measuring productivity levels, connecting with customers, and harnessing their data so that you can use that to be a bit more sharp in terms of your customer service delivery. And then what I thought was probably the most powerful box on this slide was the ability to adapt. And as we move into our next slide is this adaptability that we look at not only from a work from home perspective, but how businesses were then forced to look at different ways of doing business just to maintain business continuity. And as we emerge from lockdowns, how then do you translate that business continuity effort into a true competitive edge as you take your business forward? Which leads nicely into this slide, which we sought to bring it home. How does remote working add to your competitive advantage? But more than that, how did the pandemic force your business into looking at your business differently? And how do you use that resilience and preservation to actually create opportunities going into the future to continue to grow your business? So we lumped it into three broad buckets: cost reduction and efficiency, employees, and ultimately productivity and growth. So to the extent that you can look at your processes, evaluate them carefully, and then understand where you can accelerate your technological footprint to the extent that it reduces costs in your organization, we believe this will be very useful in helping you to maintain your competitive advantage as you go forward. Looking at e-commerce and logistics, and I guess one particular area where you will see this really come into bear was in the restaurant industry, where in the face of the widespread lockdowns and you need to have contactless service, many restaurateurs were forced to close their businesses. But in some instances where you were able to optimize on an online platform for potential patrons to be able to order, and you had the logistics in place to support this, you would have been able to continue your business with less interruption than the businesses with just a brick and mortar footprint. As you relook rental arrangements and potential utility savings, there must be a balance where, as you relook this in terms of the ability to save on costs, you must also keep the broader objective of what is my maximum productivity output. And there, again, this is on an individual basis. There are just some workers who need the structure of the office to give up their best, while there are other workers who have an ability to be able to interact and produce at the same level in the work environment. And then the other thing about this, many studies that are coming out now, is what is the change in paradigm when the lockdowns are no longer in place and people can actually go out and there are more distractions. Do you still get the same level of productive output that you would have had when there were strict lockdown policies and procedures in place? And then bringing it home to your employees, having engaged, loyal, and motivated employees goes a long way in terms of your service delivery and your interactions with clients. And having that ability built into your business to adapt to your employee and recognizing them as an internal customer, your stakeholder model, goes a long way in terms of maintaining that competitive edge as you go forward. So the employer that is still side by side with their employees through this COVID pandemic, they're going to be probably very well placed to translate that into a strong culture of resilience going forward to help to grow their business. And as we delve further into productivity and growth, there needs to be a real focus on what are the deliverables and what are the outputs. So for example, if I have my employees, working 12-hour days, what is the productive output measurement that allows me the comfort to know that these are truly productive hours that are going in? So many studies point to employees being able to save 3 hours in commute in terms of going to and from work and doing other tasks in terms of getting ready for work. How does that then translate into increased productivity, where I can measure that by having measurable and clearly defined outputs by which I can assess that productivity level? The ability to upscale digitally, that has been accelerated, as in many cases, the businesses that were able to transition to online platforms, for example, and Barbados has an example of that, where a distribution company then became an online supermarket, and that opened an opportunity for them to have business continuity in the midst of the shutdown. And what I found quite interesting about that model is they built in a clause where if you spend $100, you get free delivery. So built into that is a direct incentive to upsell to a customer. So for example, if I was going to buy $70 and I saw value in getting my groceries delivered to me for spending $100, then I may be able to spend $120, for example, to the extent that I saw value to that. Then the access to skills and capabilities, as remote working from home shows. Once we can tear down geographical boundaries, it opens up that talent pool. And to the extent that you can have that exchange of ideas and abilities, it should augur well for a strong talent pool for Caribbean businesses to be able to choose from. And that could be an exchange of talent going back and forth between first world and Caribbean countries. And then I think one of the most powerful things that came out of this is you really do need to consider your digital ecosystem. I mean, EY had invested heavily in technology, but what we found was our ability to leverage that technological investment was as much as our partners, our stakeholders in our ecosystem had leveraged and developed their technological capabilities along with us. So again, it speaks to that ease of doing business. For example, again, referring to government entities, for example, in Barbados, where some entities would have been hamstrung from not having the technological capabilities to facilitate work from home environments. So in closing, and as we wrap up the presentation, I think it's a good time to reflect on the lessons learned and the opportunities that lay ahead in terms of what many businesses would have viewed as the ultimate stress test of their people, systems, and resources, and how some businesses would have adapted and even managed to perform well, while others which sit at the other end of the spectrum and may be struggling to reopen need to view this as an inflection point to determine whether you have reshaped your business truly as a result of the COVID pandemic, so that you are in a position now to reinvent your business to grow into the future. So I think on that note, we can close out our presentation. I just want to thank the panelists and also the participants, and back over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mario. Well done. I think you not only gave us the practical examples and learnings from EY's experience, but you've actually, as aptly put in your presentation topic, how can businesses reshape and reinvent for tomorrow? I think in summary, what you have kind of outlined for us is really how businesses can build and maintain that competitive advantage. At this time, I just have one question to pose to you, Mario, and I think I'd like to also pose it to Vanessa as well, is how do you think we in the Caribbean can achieve a competitive advantage in the face face of the global economic downturn, because it is one reality that I think even as we make this presentation, we cannot ignore what has happened as a result of COVID and what it means for the economies of the Caribbean. And I'd like to just ask you and Vanessa to speak to that. And Norma, feel free to weigh in as well.
Yeah, and that is probably $1 million question. And again, each Caribbean economy is probably different in terms of what underpins the growth of the economy. And again, that's why I thought it was useful to frame our presentation that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Because if we drill a bit further, a Barbadian context, for example, or Antigua, where your economy is largely driven by tourism, are in a position where you have to figure out, how do I diversify my economy to allow me to continue to grow at the pace I would have grown historically? And that is a very difficult question, because tourism is not going to bounce back immediately. And quite frankly, even if you open your borders, the protocols that are in place are not going to be attractive to tourists to actually come in. So the leisure tourist is not necessarily going to want to come to your island destination to sit in isolation. The business traveler, in many instances, to the extent that business travel is discretionary, the business traveler also is not going to travel. So to the extent that you view tourism as the ability to rebound, that in itself presents a specific challenge. And that is where the conversation then needs to shift in terms of, what is my ability to diversify my economic base to allow me to grow? So is it that we look into, how do we expand our agricultural footprint? Is it a case of understanding, how do we build manufacturing capacity to the extent that it reduces our import bill? Because like everything else, there needs to be a balanced approach to it, and an understanding of what are the sectors that are going to allow me to create jobs, to create commerce. And I guess one of the things that you need to understand is the ecosystem and how these all work together. So to the extent that unemployment levels are rising, it reduces those customers' ability to have discretionary income to actually facilitate the commerce that we need to grow to stimulate growth in the economy. So as business leaders and as political leaders with responsibility for economies, it really calls for a social partnership approach. And I think this probably extends across the Caribbean in terms of understanding, what are the pockets of growth that we can now leverage outside of the, what I would call at-risk sectors, because tourism, as we've seen, because while it was unforeseen to have a pandemic of this nature, it is not necessarily the most resilient industry in the face of something like this. So is it a case now that we pivot to, what are the skills and services that we can develop? I just saw, for example, Cuba, even though it's a very small example, they exported 50 doctors into Italy to help to fight the pandemic. So what are the skills and resources that we can export to the extent that it drives economic growth, as well as how then do you create the skill that allows you to either tap into sectors such as agriculture or manufacturing, and the level of intervention that governments have to play in terms of stimulating this growth prospect.
Sorry, thank you very much. I would like to add something to that, Misha, and thank you very much for sharing what you did. I would like to look at it from a slightly different perspective. I really believe that our biggest resource in the Caribbean are our people. We have so much talent. Yes, the economic sector has suffered, some of the economic sectors have suffered greatly. There's no question about that. I'm on part of the tourism task force to look at what are the opportunities for that. And it will take some time for that sector to rebound, no question about it. But what are the capacities of our people that we have not tapped? And what about the new emerging sectors? The alternative and renewable energy sector is a huge one that we have not tapped. We have not tapped the capacity of all of the seaweed that is on our shores and can be converted into energy or converted into for use in agriculture. We have not tapped the many different technologies in our agriculture, technologies that can be used, hydroponics and otherwise, to make our agriculture more productive and allow us to export instead of having such a, in fact, or to meet our needs instead of having such a high import bill. But what are we doing with our people to maximize, to point them into some new directions where we will be able to be much greater self-sufficient? And I don't need to say anything about the renewable energy area, because we have not really begun to tap into that we have available to us. I am confident about our future and our Caribbean future. And I do not believe that, I do not believe that that future is dependent on us necessarily bringing people here, but we have skills that we can export, and we're already exporting, and we need to be able to find ways to maximize those. So I support what you're saying, and I'm also adding that we need to get our companies thinking more innovatively, creatively about how we export and how we utilize our capacities more effectively. So, I don't know, Vanessa?
Yeah, just a little input. I mean, I agree with both your comments. Thanks. I mean, those were very elaborate. I think for me, a little small comment, just to also touch on what Mario said about the social partnership approach. And I see an opportunity there because the region is stronger together. And I'm saying I see an opportunity, particularly with the role of the PM Barbados as the current chair of CARICHAM and the space that she has created for the private sector to inform and be part of the discussions in terms of shaping the economic trajectory of the region. So there is an opportunity that the private sector plays a very important role. I mean, I've been in the region for a few years, and in my engagement with employers, issues around productivity, competitiveness have been on the agenda. And I know that the issues around diversification is not a new discussion for the region. I mean, there has been discussion in the past around diversification. This morning, there was a discussion of the OECS in terms of COVID and how to move forward. And again, diversification came up, and using technology and innovation to really start thinking about diversifying. So I think my small point, we have a good leader in CARICHAM, and I think with the involvement and participation of the private sector, there could be some very great results. Thanks.
I believe you're on mute, Misha.
Okay, I just said thank you all very much for your responses to that question. And at this time, we are doing good time. I'd like to just offer, there's one question, sorry. Oh, a point being made by one of our panelists, Rodney Taylor, and he says that he thinks that there's an opportunity for the Caribbean to present itself as an ideal work from home location. There is the technology, infrastructure, the weather, the stable political environment, good quality life. But he wanted to know what incentives can we offer to encourage this, in particular, to attract many of the online companies based within the hemisphere. An excellent question, Rodney. Thank you very much. It is open. The floor is open to either panelist. Any one of you who'd like to just respond. Mario, you were going to respond?
I was actually leaving that one to the HR practitioners.
Okay, I have a response. Thank you very much, Rodney, for that. And I think what you're saying is the Caribbean can be the home point for many of the companies that are now doing remote work across the world. We can be their home port. As we have done very well in the offshore sector. I would say that we need to pay much more attention to this at the senior government level. So I'm not sure that I'm the best person to answer that question in terms of policy. But certainly, one of the things that we need to do is to build that awareness in our people, that if we are going to be receptive to exporting our skills, to delivering work outside of our borders on behalf of our companies and on behalf of many companies across the world, we have to have a very high productive work ethic. It is pretty high, but it can be better. And I think that a lot of the things need to go in to helping our students see the potential for themselves in work beyond our borders in very explicit ways. But we do need to have, and I wish we had somebody from the government level here to be able to speak to the policy initiatives that need to happen. I know the Minister of Trade is very, very keen to get us on board with exporting our services and exporting our services not only to the world, but to the region, because we have some good examples and there is support. We need to just explore that much more explicitly at the policy level. So that's a very good question. I don't have the answers, but I have confidence that we have the capacity and the commitment to make it happen.
Thank you very much, Norma. And I think you have answered somewhat, and I hope Rodney is satisfied by the response. But you are correct that it is a conversation and a process of engagement that we have to continue. And as I invite each panelist to give a 2-minute summary, I'd just like to start with Vanessa and ask Vanessa, in summarizing, if you could just address for us, what can we learn from the global community in terms of building the future economic base of the Caribbean as we look forward to the new future of work, the future paradigm? Vanessa?
Thank you so much. I think what is coming out from the data that we have collected around the world, particularly in terms of the response to COVID-19, we see a lot of partnership, and we see the private sector also leading and taking leadership in some initiatives. And I think these lessons also are here in the Caribbean. I know Jamaica, I know in Barbados, where we've seen the private sector stepping and saying we are going to be able to work with the government and provide the following. So I think collaboration has been, at the center of the response in many countries, but also the role of the private sector in stepping up and actually providing necessary and required support to both employers and workers, and working with the government, of course, to facilitate some of the stimulus packages as proposed. Thanks.
Mario?
Yeah, just in closing, what was very evident from the follow of this pandemic is just you need to critically evaluate the way we do business here, and also you need to incorporate technology and people in terms of what is that way forward that allows us to truly optimize on our position as an island nation, and also that need for integration among the region in terms of having those platforms and the infrastructure, which I guess to Norma's point is one thing to have the people, is another thing to have the infrastructure and the facilitative framework in place that allows you to be truly business competitive as businesses go forward. So look at the example of Twitter, for example, where their CEO has basically come out and said, indefinitely, workers can work from home. And to the question that one of the participants had, you know, why can't Barbados be a destination of choice for some of those employees to come and operate from? So I think it really needs to be you really need to have a policy framework in place, and that one of the things that you need to look at there is the speed at which transaction and business can be conducted throughout the region, and also having that facilitative policy framework and focusing in on certain key industries that allow us to grow and continue to be competitive in this new shift that this COVID has accelerated.
Over to you, Norma.
I am passionate about helping people to work more effectively with organizations and organizations to work more effectively with people. And in this COVID and post-COVID period, because we are not going to go back to the world as it was. The biggest issue one of the biggest issues in my view is leadership. And leadership is around vision and around working and inspiring people. We have to have the technology. We have to use the technology, but we have to have the leaders who are thinking ahead, thinking outside the box, not feeling that they need to conform to what happened before, being open to the innovation and ideas from people across their businesses, and trying to break down some of the hierarchical and silo barriers that have prevented us from really maximizing the talent that is in there. And I believe that our businesses will not only, many will fail, but the ones that will survive are moving on that road. The ones that will thrive are taking innovation, taking their vision and making sure that their people are pulling along with them, because we will rebuild and create better and more competitive businesses for the future. That is my belief, and that is where I leave everyone. I think that all of our panelists are on the same wavelength.
Correct. So we end, as I started, by saying there is no doubt that as business transition post-COVID, that we have to evaluate how we do business, new ways of thinking, more flexible approaches to work, new ways to deliver services, and utilizing technology to do so if we are to maintain a competitive edge across the Caribbean with respect to businesses. And in a nutshell, I just like to say, yes, as our topic says, remote work, it does offer opportunities and benefits for the Caribbean, but just to wrap up and summarize, it has to be where businesses recognize the need for adaptability, and for them to stay adaptable, the need supporting Maria's presentation for a digital ecosystem that would ensure we are effectively utilizing technology, the need for diversification, innovation, and creative approaches, and as Norma said, to be able to think creatively, and ensuring that we invest in our human resources and maximize the potential. I feel your passion, Norma, and you're correct. We have to look at maximizing the human resources, because that is what we have across the Caribbean, our people. And I must throw into that, Norma, what you have reiterated and punched, the need for leadership to prioritize leadership over management. The paradigm calls for new approach and new approaches, but we need to also underpin that to end on the note that Vanessa said. It has to be human-centered, and we have to underpin that with the correct policies and legislation if we are to do this right and take the Caribbean forward. I would just like to invite the president of the Chamber of Caribbean Chambers of Network, Lizra, to just close us out on a thank you note. But it was indeed a pleasure for me to be given the opportunity to moderate this session and to share with you panelists and to share with you participants. Thank you all.
Thank you so very much, Misha, for hosting and moderating this session. And I would like to say a big thank you to all our panelists here today. First of all, I would like to start with Vanessa from the ILO on speaking about remote work and the implications for workforce regionally and globally post-COVID. You gave great insights and you really gave us some food for thought as to how we can improve what we're doing. Norma, Shorey-Bryan, thank you so much for bridging this gap. You say you want to bridge the gap between organizations and the people and ensuring that we can improve what we do. Thank you for your valuable insight and ensuring that we understand that leadership is very important and we need to be agile. Mario, it was quite insightful seeing from a business perspective what you've been doing and how you brought across your information. I think all our participants here today would agree that this was quite insightful and it will help us to improve our competitive advantage. Misha, to you and your team, we really thank you for hosting this and for setting up the platform. This is the first time we're using one of our chambers platform to host our regional growth series. So we look forward to continuing to partner with you on this initiative. And to all our attendees from our region, from out of the region, within our chambers, especially our CARICHAM leaders, our executive directors and CEOs, the members of our chambers, we are really grateful that you took the time to try to understand how we could ensure that we maintain a competitive edge in business within the region. This is a time that we really have to see how we improve what we do, and the fact that you're here today is testament to the fact that you really desire to maintain your competitive edge so that our Caribbean can truly shine through this. So once again, thank you to everyone. We hope to see you at our session 3, where we'll share more information with you as soon as possible. So to everyone, do have a blessed day.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Thank you again. Okay, bye-bye.